Alright, let's dive in. So like I said, it is conceivable that the way we see the world is an acquired taste. Okay? And this should compel us or prompt us to ask the question, why can't we decide on the issue of minimum wage by using wisdom instead of the calculus of mathematics? Why is it so difficult for us to actually see beyond the whole issue of why we need to introduce minimum wage? And why do we stick, and why are we so insistent on the whole idea of keeping to the free market and prioritizing the idea of the profit motive at every cost and opportunity? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm all for the whole idea of capitalism, but where I feel capitalism takes a wrong turn is when the whole idea of the profit motive becomes the sole criterion of making a decision, that it colors everything else from top to bottom and everything in between, and as a consequence it squeezes out the good. And in the last sharing, what I mentioned was the whole idea of the welfare state, and I'm going to follow on from where we actually left off. Now, the Beveridge report, when it first came out, was actually shared to only a few people, and this is very strange, because you would have thought that a report that had such an important and far-reaching national implication would basically be shared to the whole nation. No, it was shared in basically a small little room in a place in Kingsway, London, and was shared in a gentleman's club. And many of the people who were there were basically exiles or people who had to flee the Nazis. And again, this was a strange aberration of history, because you would have thought that this had nothing to do with exiles, and it had everything to do with the British public. So the question that it prompts a lot of people to ask is, why was it structured in such an odd manner? And I think this is a clue to what the proponents or the fathers of the welfare state envisage. Because at that time, in late 1943, they already knew, most of the planners in Europe already knew that Hitler was a done deal. He and his motley crew were done for. They had lost most of their top encampments, the Totenkopf, Leibstandarte, the 6th Army, the 7th. And these are units that were not only the main core of the Wehrmacht and the Waffen-SS, but they formed the basis of why Hitler was able to seize power in Europe. And all these units were totally gone. They were finished. So everybody, from Roosevelt to Churchill, right down to even Stalin in Moscow, knew that it was only a matter of time before Europe would basically be a portion of. And the proponents of the Beveridge report, when they came up with the whole idea of the welfare state, it was actually supposed to be a blueprint for the new Europe. And that was why when Bevin was basically a labor, later became a labor minister, shared with this industrialists, only a handful of industrialists in this small little room in Kingsway, his whole blueprint for a new Europe. Many of the audiences began to scream out, Jerusalem. They went, Jerusalem. They were Jews. And in Hebrew and Aramaic, the word Jerusalem should not be confused with the word Jerusalem. Jerusalem means the city of peace. But when you use the plural, which is Yesuralahim, it means cities of peace. Cities of peace. So what the proponents were envisioning was a new order. Nomos fortis, a new order. Tabula rasa. They envisaged a new order for Europe. And why would that be so? Why was there a need for a new order in Europe? Because what many people did not realize was the rise of evil, the rise of Adolf Hitler was the result of greed, avarice, and the result of the whole idea of not taking care of your brother. You see, usually when we structure the whole idea of the question of whether we should help the poor, the metaphor is always, the poor is over there. He's out of sight and out of mind. But what these people were saying is that we cannot afford to forsake the poor, because in metaphoric terms, the poor is essentially not so different from a man sitting in the same boat as you and I, and basically he has sprung a leak between his legs. And we have to basically stop that leak if we are to keep the whole idea of the common good. And as we saw in the whole case of the economic meltdown, if you do not take care of your brother, do not for one moment believe that whatever ills or whatever pains that he's suffering will eventually spread to you. The whole idea when we talk about economic contagion or globalization these days is that our fates are inextricably linked together. That means what happens in New York or Paris or Mozambique or even Timbuktu will have an implication on you and I. Okay? It will have a shock effect. And we see this most blatantly in the case of the currency wars that's going on. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So the people, the proponents of the Beveridge Report, envisioned a new Europe. And the reason why they wanted a new Europe was because the rise of Hitler was a consequence of runaway greed. After the First World War, and this I think is something we should talk about, at the end of the First World War, what happened was the League of Nations. Now the League of Nations is a precursor to what you have today, which is the UN. And the UN is an organization that I call the United Nothing, okay? United Nothingness, okay? Now the League of Nations basically were the people who essentially put together in order to sort out the new Europe after the end of the First World War. And what they did was they imposed very strict and crippling terms and conditions on Germany. For example, Germany was considered to be the person who was responsible for the First World War. So they had to pay something like reparations. And these reparations at that time amounted to 6.6 billion, all right, US dollars. And in today's terms, you're talking about somewhere around 500 to 600 billion dollars. And this was an amount that was just simply economically unsustainable. And on top of that, Germany was emasculated. Certain parts of Czechoslovakia, the Rhineland, the Ruhr, Alsace-Lorraine, and these were basically parts of Germany. And at that time there was a cartoonist, his name was Karl Kraus, and basically he came up with a very funny depiction of the different parts of Germany, like the arms and legs and the fingers, each one representing different parts of Germany being cut off, and the only thing you have of Germany was basically the head and the body, and all the legs and the arms have been basically separated and given to countries like France, the UK, and the Allies during the First World War. And this was actually the foundation that actually created the perfect conditions for people like Hitler to rise. Because the new government that took over beleaguered Germany at that time was not able to basically revivify the economy. They were not able to create the conditions to sustain a coherent society. And that condition, that limitation created perfect conditions for the rise of Adolf Hitler. So the people, the proponents of the Beveridge Report were very, very determined to ensure that the same conditions did not prevail again. They were very mindful that at the end of World War II, they would have to deal with the emerging challenge of a Soviet Russia. And Russia at that time had already begun to fight. They were a superpower in their own right. And so the people in that room, the industrialists, who said, yes, we must do this, they said that this will be the new Europe. We will take care of our brothers.